So yesterday, September 8th, Fujifilm held their X Summit in New York City. Now they announced three different things, three pieces of hardware, which none of these were surprises. The Fujifilm X-H2, the 56 millimeter f1.2 version 2. Now this is a weather sealing, so if you look at B&H or Amazon, you won't really have the class, the Type 2 indicator. It'll say the what is it, WS for weather sealing. So just FYI, this is the original 56 millimeter f1.2, and I like this lens and the GFX lens, the GF20 to 35 f4. So no surprises. We were expecting to get these three things, and I did try to watch the X Summit in its entirety. And I'll tell you what, guys, for me, this was the most poorly put together summit yet. Now, none of them have been super great. They don't put on any big shows like Sony or any of the other Canon and so on for the camera manufacturers. But this is really, really, in my opinion, poorly done. They could have hired a high school person and put a better promotion out there. So, really lacking in the promotion and marketing side of things. But they did their normal introductions, but in a weird way. They kept on going back between English and Japanese with the teleprompting, but I get that because their headquarters are in Japan. It was just no emotion. It was very weird with the backgrounds, with some weird flowers that they had put together. Just really weird. I really couldn't watch it. I had to fast forward through all of it. I kept on skipping, and I got to the point where I start looking at websites or YouTube channels to see what they had to say. And if you've watched the Apple release that just was happened a few days ago, theirs was bad too. I think these companies are getting worse. I don't know if they're trying to put more into it, and the result is less. So at the end of this, they had their Fujifilm photographers, and they were just sitting around a table. Let me see if I can go to YouTube, and I'll go to the end. So if you want to check it out, again, the link will be in the description. And here's the panel they had. And I really thought what they were going to do is have some interactive communication between like an audience, asking them questions, like real hard questions about what the camera does, because they've all used it. They've done YouTube videos on it, but they didn't do that. It was just weird general questions, and it was just odd. It was very odd. So that said, let's talk about the three things, or at least two of the things. I don't really know anything about the GFX, so I know people were wanting this GF20 to 35 f4. Maybe one day I'll actually try the GFX system to see what it's about, but I won't cover that here. I do want to talk a little bit about the Fujifilm X-H2 and the 56 millimeter 1.2 version 2. Now, we knew we were going to get 8K with this camera, and I'm not going to go through all of the specs because I think most people, including myself, and I know I'm going to get flamed in the comments to say, oh, the X-H2 is the camera we've been waiting for. But even if you look at the Fujifilm on the Fujifilm official YouTube site where I watched this summit video, every comment was, when's the XT5 coming? What about my battery grip for the XT5? Where's, nothing. There was like one or two comments about, yeah, this is exciting. I want to get the XH2. But essentially, the XH2 is the XH2S with a 40 megapixel BSI, not a stacked BSI, but a BSI sensor. And it's got the same function and buttons and layouts and everything as the XH2S. So you're basically, and we knew this, right? You're going to trade megapixels for speed. Now, the XH2S is faster, right? And even Fujifilm makes a reference or two about the speed. The autofocus and some other things will be faster with the XH2S. And I'm sure it's because of that stacked sensor. They probably have the same processor and all of that. But and that's what the indicator of the S is speed. I know for me, I thought one was going to be video centric, the other one was going to be photo centric, but this really isn't kind of like that. One's speed, one's higher resolution, and that's where I wanted to talk about in the higher resolution. So the XH2S is I think $24.99, and the XH2, because it doesn't have that stack sensor. Stack sensors are expensive. It's listed as $19.99, so $2,000 for the XH2. And I was watching this because I had high hopes that, and it was rumored to be announced that with the summit that they were going to talk about this new 40 megapixel BSI sensor of having better low light capabilities, both on lower ISO and high ISO. Fuji did not touch it, not with a 50-foot pole. One of the Fujifilm photographers on their one of their videos, they mentioned because the new native ISO I think went from 160 to 125, so they were expecting, or they made a reference about lower light, better ISO, lower noise in the lower ISO for like landscape photographers and so on. Nobody even mentioned high ISO reduction, which I was really waiting, hoping for at least a half a stop. So that was very, very, very disappointing for me. Really, that was kind of it. I mean, it's got all the good features that the XH2S has. The great, what is it, the viewfinder, things like that. And you can attach the fan. So this camera will do 6K, 8K. And there's certain resolutions that you can do like RAW for external. So they're both very, very video centric and photography. So they're both hybrid cameras. For me, if I was picking the two, I would actually choose probably the XH2S because you get less rolling shutter. Some people did some examples on the rolling shutter, and it didn't look too great on the XH2. Now, I don't know if it's really worse than the XT4, but it didn't look great. So the XH2S does give you some improvements because you're getting that faster readout. They also boasted on the XH2 is having some crazy e-shutter. It's like 1 over 180,000 and how it can capture still photos. And it's like, okay, unless I'm missing something, in order to go that high in that shutter speed, you need an enormous amount of light. So normally it's strobes, right? That's how you get, the Xeon bulbs, how you get that big flash, that big studio strobe kind of burst of light. But if you're using e-shutter, it's not going to sync. So I don't know how this would be usable unless you had some huge video lights, enormous blaring sun. I just don't know how you would actually take any kind of benefit of that. And I'm not knocking it. I just really, if I'm trying to be critiquing it, trying to be kind of reasonable of what that feature gives you, I can't really think of any good use. I don't know if you guys have it in the comments. Please leave it down below. But other than that, again, they're both video, they're both hybrid. You can put the add-on fan, which I think that's a good move that Fujifilm made with the fan, because I don't think it'll be big on overheating. It seems like the thermals are pretty good on these cameras, this camera body. It's just one's faster readout, lower megapixel. And I'm not huge on the megapixel. That 26 megapixel is a sweet spot for me. Maybe not for some, like a landscape photographer. Yeah, that 40 megapixel is probably a sweet spot for them. And I'm not hating megapixels, right? But one of the things for me is I don't use anything that's big enough to warrant the megapixel. So the workflow, not necessarily the camera, the workflow in the storage increases. Now I'm okay with giving that sacrifice up as far as that workflow and the storage space if I can get some benefit that I'm going to use, like better high ISO. But I haven't seen that. Not saying it's not, guys. I just haven't seen it. The other thing that I found was really interesting, and the reason I brought this Fuji Rumor site up, and I will leave you guys the link. If you watch my videos, I refer these guys all the time when I'm doing some Fuji Talk videos, is the resolve on the old lenses. Now I have, what do I have? I have this 56 millimeter 1.2. I have the 23 millimeter 1.4 version 1, and all of my lenses are the version 1. And I have the 16 millimeter 1.4 and the 10 to 24. So I have quite a few old lenses is where I'm going. And I'm not looking to buy a bunch of new lenses. I might pick up 1 or 2 lenses especially if something's good in video, which unfortunately none of the new ones are stellar, even with the new autofocus in video. They're not bad, but they're not what I think a lot of us hoped it to be. So My question when I'm watching this, they keep on talking about to get the most out of this 40 megapixel sensor, this lens, this 56 millimeter 1.2, it can resolve. And then they refer to as, the 18 millimeter 1.4, which that's one of the lenses I kind of considered buying. The new 23 millimeter remake, the version 2, and the 30, instead of the 35, they call it the 33 millimeter, right? I don't know if they remade the 23 or not. Can't remember. But basically, any of the newer lenses, they can resolve to that full 40 megapixel resolution. And I'm not hating Fuji for that because that's kind of what it is. You usually don't design lenses that's 2 times the resolution of the camera. At least most people don't. Sony did when they came out with their professional line. And again, different size, different price range. But they had it in mind as like, these are our top end lenses. We're going to design them for not today, but the future. And so that they can resolve in those higher megapixel cameras because they're coming. And again, Fuji's been around a while, so maybe they didn't have plans or the technology didn't think the technology would grow that far. Now they're going back and redoing the lenses, so I'm not mad at them for it. It's just from my personal standpoint, and you guys are probably there, or some of you there anyway. It's like, am I going to sell and rebuy my lenses just to get some more resolution, and how much more resolution? And I found this interesting because that's what I was thinking of when I was watching this summit and watching these videos. They actually cover it here is the megapixel sensor. So based on what they're saying here on Fuji rumors, and they haven't done probably any extensive testing, but this guy probably did get an early release camera. Some of these bigger YouTube channels, they've gotten these cameras, the XH2, a week ahead of time before the press release. And right here he says, let's be clear, more or less every single Fujifilm XF lens will perform better on the 40 megapixel sensor. So that's good. So yes, and I kind of expected that. So better, but how much better? So what he goes on to say is, so even if an older lens can't really resolve at that full 40 megapixel, they will still perform better at, okay, he just repeated the same thing. So some might resolve 30 megapixel, others 33 megapixel. So others more or less. So where that tells me is based on all my old lenses, and I don't have any red badge lenses either. Mine are all like the standard XF metal body construction and so on. I'm looking at about 30 to 33. So let's call it, he said less or more. So let's call it around 30. So 26 megapixel camera from the X-T3, X-T4. I'm getting 4 megapixel bump unless I buy all new lenses. So I'm like, eh. And again, I was okay with having that overhead of that megapixel. So if I'm resolving only at 30 megapixel, if I can get a stop of light. Now, if I can't get a stop of light, I don't see a benefit of going to an X-T5 because the X-T5 will get this 40 megapixel sensor unless they have other features that I can get on board. I don't know, guys. It's kind of where I'm going with this. It's kind of making me nervous, deflating my expectations for that better high ISO. And I don't know if we'll see it. I think if it was there, Fujifilm would brag about it. Some of the early releases would be like, hey, look, this is what we're getting. We're getting this stellar high resolution picture, lower noise from ISO, high ISO. Haven't seen that yet. And even the resolution, and I get it's just was a release, but some of these channels had it for a week. And I know they don't have a raw processor. So Photoshop, Lightroom, none of these softwares have the proper updates to go ahead and process raw. But what I would like to see, these guys have these. Can't they just take a picture in JPEG, do some crop? I mean, simple crops on Lightroom in a JPEG. We're not even talking raw files. Do some cropping and do like a 300, 400%, zoom in Lightroom. Let's see what that resolve power is on new and old lenses. And some of them are tainted. You can tell just by the way they kind of pump up. And I do like Fujifilm, but I'm not a fanboy. The DP Review, the old camera store guys, They did a short little video, didn't tell us a whole lot. I know they'll do additional ones, but I was really hoping they would cut to the chase and say, okay, here's what we're seeing. Is there any bump in ISO? Is there any, crazy resolution? And just some high level things. Didn't see it. One feature that the XH2 has that the XH2S doesn't is pixel shifting. And what that does is it takes multiple high resolution 40 megapixel pictures and it shifts with it using its IBIS. So ultimately, I think it stitches them together to get, I want to say, 160 megapixel picture, which is huge, right? So not too many people need that high of resolution. Some might. But the caveat to that is most people don't find pixel shifting usable. I've never used it myself, but I've seen multiple videos that if you're using it for a landscape, which is one perfect example, you get a lot of artifacts because even though you have a static photo, there's some movement. You have clouds, you have trees just shifting ever so slightly, and you get a lot of weird artifacts when it does that stitching together. So I guess the algorithm isn't quite to the level as Apple and the iPhones, so it's not like seamless. Now, not to say Fuji hasn't perfected this, and maybe it's a perfect implementation, but if it's anything like the others, Canon and so on, it may not be 100% usable. So want to point that out. And then the 56 millimeter f1.2. Now that lens looks good. It's going for $1,000. I'm pretty sure that's the same price of the version one. I think I paid $899 for it, $1,000, and it looks like it is better, as more sharper. The opening on the front is larger. It's got a bigger it's a bigger lens, but the weight didn't increase by any, if not much at all. So that looks like a good bump. The lens still holds true to its character. It just looks like it grew a little bit. So I do kind of like that 56 millimeter 1.2. Some people gave it a knock on the focusing. I guess it's still got the old style focusing, although it does better. It doesn't have linear focus motors, but that might be a lens where I think about picking up. But this one does good. One of the things that it does much better is in the corners. For me, this 56 millimeter, I tend to use it for portraits, and with portraits, I'm not shooting in the corners. I mean, I don't care if they're blurry because you know what? I'm usually shooting it wide open, and they're going to be blurry anyway. Yeah, so would I buy it? I don't know. Um, Probably not, but it does have me thinking about it. The lens will have to really, overcome some challenges that I'm having in order to spend the money. So, um, guys, I'd love to hear your comments. And yeah, again, I'll leave these links in the description. So if you want to check these things out yourself, please do. Thanks for watching and take care. Bye.